it helped me to see people rather than behaviours, and it helped me to understand that in order to achieve positive outcomes, you have to be able to work with people that do bad things. And really, really difficult. And I probably fucked myself up a little bit in the process because I was getting no therapy at the time. But it did teach me a lot, and to this day it's still probably one of the jobs that I think forced me to face my own reality. Then from there we had Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria that ripped through the state, and I got moved into child protection.
Welcome to Conversations with Kristi. I'm Kristi McVee, a former WA police officer, specialist child interviewer and child abuse detective. For years I worked on the front lines investigating child sexual abuse, where I saw the risks, the patterns, and most importantly, the ways that we can protect our kids. Now I'm here to share that knowledge with you. This podcast is all about real conversations, giving parents, carers, and educators the tools to keep their kids safe, both in person and online. Through survivor stories, expert insights, and practical advice, we'll navigate these tough topics together so you feel informed, confident, and empowered. Because when we know better, we can do better, and our kids deserve nothing less. Content warning. Some topics and conversations can be triggering for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised as your mental health is important. Please refer to my website and the show notes for available support services. Hello and welcome back to Conversations with Kristi. I actually think this might be the last podcast for this year. I don't know if you know, Jeanie, that my husband's got cancer at the moment. Oh, yes, you do know that because I think I might have cancelled one of our last podcast attempts, and I decided that I would finish off the year with you. So I think this is it. I don't think there's actually anyone else booked in. So if there is, it's a surprise to me. But this is my last podcast for the year just so that I can spend some time caring for my husband. You know, I love talking to people and having these conversations, but oh my gosh, all of the production behind it is really like full on. So I'm giving myself a break and getting back to it next year. But yeah, Jeanie, thank you so much for jumping on and having a conversation. I'm really interested in your story. I know we've had conversations before and you've got a really interesting story, and I'm sure my listeners will love to hear it. And also they'll love to hear what you do now. So for anyone listening, Jeanie Dean, can you please explain or share, first of all, where you got started and how you got into this space of, child safeguarding and safeguarding?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a long story and I'll try and chunk it out into sections, but I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse myself, and I grew up in a household that was very much the dynamic of family violence. So from there, I suppose you can kind of create that image in your mind of what that would have looked like. I also grew up in at that time was a regional area in Hervey Bay. And so telling people what was happening in your life in a small town was not very easy. And so I'd grown up basically being told what happens in the house stays in the house. And so I just followed that trend at the time that I was assaulted. I went home the morning after that happened, and I went to bed and told nobody. My sister picked up that something wasn't quite right, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I think I might have even told her to F off and leave me alone. And our parents basically pinned us against each other as a means to basically alienate each parent and separate and manage through division. So early childhood experiences were quite challenging. And then my extended family outside of that, we didn't have heaps of money, but we didn't go without. We had incidences associated to addiction. And then after I was assaulted when I was 15, I decided that I was going to move back to Melbourne. My mum was going to leave my dad, and we came to Melbourne. I'll just backtrack for 1 second. If I think about the thing that I remember the most out of that family violence experience was coming home from school. I was in grade 3, coming home from school, and my whole house was empty, and I was put in a car and driven to Queensland. We weren't told, me or my sister weren't told why we were going. We weren't told that my dad didn't know that we were leaving. Basically, it was a very quick pack and run situation. And then my mum made contact with my dad halfway to Queensland because she was fearful that if she didn't tell him, then it would be worse. And so basically that's been my life, has just been this constant little,
push and pull
tornado of chaos, just trying to not get sucked into it all the time. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, when you're little and
Yeah.
when you're 15, you are little, even
Yeah.
though a lot of 15-year-olds think that they are not. Yes, we are
Yeah.
young adults and we need autonomy and we need to be involved and be included and we have decisions not made for us but with us. But at the same time, it led me to a pathway of coping mechanisms that were really unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I ended up using a lot of drugs. I'm not going to say that I didn't have a great time while I was doing those drugs because I did. Um, but it was a really poor, it was a coping strategy that was allowed me to feel normal, quote unquote.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
And a lot of people do that. A lot of young people
yeah,
do that. A lot of people, and we know that anyone who is a victim of any kind of child maltreatment has a higher risk of becoming, either using substances to numb out the emotions and stuff. And it's not until
yeah,
we become an older, more wiser adult, hopefully, that we
yeah.
realize that's what we were doing.
Absolutely. What forced me to realize that is I actually got arrested when I was 18, which was
Okay.
incredibly scary. So the only involvement I'd had with police in my life was to do with my father,
Hmm.
for mistakes he had made in his life when we were young kids. And other than that, we were told that police were dogs and
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. So
I knew that's what you were going to say.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've been called all of that.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you're coming from a household such as mine where,
Mm,
and I'll get into the bit about my dad later, but, that was a very scary dynamic to be in and not
mm.
knowing who to trust and what to trust. And what made that even worse is that it actually involved a underworld situation in Victoria that we did
Oh,
not
wow.
realise we were a part of.
Scary.
And so then basically from there, the concept, everything that had been drummed into me about police
Yeah.
then became reality because it was one of the largest corruption cases in Victoria at that time with the Major Drug Investigation Division.
Oh,
So,
wow.
um,
And I guess you wouldn't have known whilst you were doing that, getting involved in that. You're just having a good time as a teenager. And this is how teens get in trouble because
I
they
was
just
just
do it.
part of something,
Yeah, you're just part
I
of it, but then you're in it. In
correct.
in it.
In
Yeah.
it. Yeah, and it was really in it. And
Yeah, right.
we didn't realize that. Obviously, at the time, we were just,
Teens.
yeah, and it is very true that, organized crime syndicates, they do absolutely target vulnerability. And,
Oh, yeah.
we
And
were
teens are the most vulnerable because
absolutely
we, I mean, I look at I got kicked out of home at 15. So you were, sexually abused and then, sort of like pulled into this world that because you thought that you were an adult. And,
yeah,
I thought I was an adult at 15 because I was kicked out of home. All of a sudden I had these big responsibilities on my shoulders. And,
absolutely.
you just think that you can cope and handle anything. Like I look back at how stupid I was. I was
Yeah,
so, so stupid. I mean, I was trying to act an adult, but I was nowhere near an adult.
yeah, yeah, 100%. I think it became from my end, it was just about surviving. Like I just needed to survive, and my mum at that point in time was not in a good way herself,
Yep,
dealing with
totally.
being a victim of violence and fractured relationships with my other sister because of my father doing the whole alienation thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then after we got arrested, I was kind of I thank the universe for that arrest because if that didn't happen,
Changed your path.
it was a sliding doors moment. And
Yeah.
I either, statistically, if we, rely on science and rely on research, I probably should have ended up being a sex worker with a heroin addiction, and
Mm,
instead I had an amazing police officer, but I'm not going to mention her name because I don't know how comfortable she would be given
yeah, that's fair
the
enough.
dynamics that sit behind that case. But she single-handedly just made me and my now husband, who I got arrested with at the time, who I'm now married to.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool. Like, that's kind of like, whoa, that I didn't see that turn coming.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing. You're
yeah.
still together. That's
Still
amazing.
together, yeah, that little street kid romance, we survived it, but certainly the exception, not the rule. So any kids that are
Yeah.
listening, that is
That's
not
not how
anything
it
that,
usually
yeah,
happens. No.
doesn't
And I
happen that
mean,
way.
I'm still with my husband nearly 30 years,
Yeah,
next year. And that's not we are the exceptions because I think we're just too stubborn to give up.
yeah,
I'm like, we're
yeah.
just too fucking stubborn, like
Yeah,
literally.
and I can't be bothered. I've put in all of this effort.
I know, I
Figure
trained
it
you
out.
just how I like you. Yeah, I know. But no, that and we come, all of that trauma that you have from domestic violence, growing up in that domestic violence family, and having that experiences also that doesn't make us easy to deal with. They've had a tough ride, like
Absolutely,
they've
yeah,
hung on there like a bronco.
yeah.
I
My
joke,
husband,
I
my
joke, but it's
my
funny.
husband has been the. So yes, we got arrested together. I met him when I was just 18, and we were arrested probably about 6 months after that.
Oh
We
wow,
moved in
what a
together 3 weeks
change.
after we met. Don't do anything slowly when you're a traumatized young person. Everything's very quick.
No, yeah,
And
that's true.
don't leave me is basically what we're saying. And
Codependency.
yeah,
Like I need you to
yeah,
survive.
yeah. And then it wasn't until probably, so after the arrest and everything happened, I kind of, that was my, light bulb moment of, I don't want to be my dad, and everything I've been doing has been not to, I don't want to be an angry person. I don't want to be a resentful person. I don't want to hurt people.
Yeah,
And I knew that if I didn't change, that I was going to hurt people,
yeah,
and more than I already had by doing what I was doing.
yeah,
And
exactly.
so, like with the drugs and all that sort of stuff. And so my husband struggled. So, well, my boyfriend at the time, but Judd, who's now my husband, he struggled to get away from the drugs and get off them a little bit more than I did. And that was partly because I found out I was pregnant just before I was arrested. And
You had something to give up for. I mean, he did too, but at the same time, you had another human
yeah,
growing.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
a great. I mean, for some people, it is the biggest motivator to not
Yeah.
put that onto a child.
100%. And because of the arrest, I ended up not proceeding with the pregnancy because the probability of prison time was very, very real.
Okay.
And my husband, the police gave him an option to take the whole lot and let me go. Um, and this is 3 months of being with a person. And he said, let her go. I'll take the lot. Yeah. So he
What a
basically,
sacrifice as
yeah,
well,
huge.
like,
And that's why now it's, I couldn't have my career without him because I can't work in the space I work in with a criminal record.
yeah,
So he literally saved my life in more than one way. He's the safest person I have in my life that I can talk to, who,
yeah,
we've put each other through the ringer. And like you said, yes, they've had to hang on like a bronco because
yeah.
I absolutely would have
Probably
been
from
a
both sides,
nightmare. Absolutely,
Yeah,
100%.
it's not just one way in
Just
these
different, just
situations.
different it's different,
Yeah,
like
totally.
I know exactly what I can be like, and I reckon I could be a nightmare, particularly when I was younger.
Same, same.
But
I
I own it,
know.
and it's made me who I am, and I don't hide away from that. And if you
Yeah,
like me, you like me, and if you don't, you don't, and that's fine.
yeah.
But I'm,
But having that one person, it makes all the difference, doesn't
huge.
it? It,
Yeah,
it helps because they don't give up on you and you don't give up on them. And so
yeah.
then when that happens, I remember, I don't know
It's like
about
that
you.
song, I've Got Issues. You know that song, I've Got
Yeah.
Issues and You've Got Them Too? Yeah. When that came
Yes.
out, I was like, oh my God, that's our song.
Let's go down the aisle to it. No, but I reckon like with my husband and he didn't have the same childhood experiences or anything like that, but he had like he was very ADHD and he had he was all that risk-taking behaviors. There was
Hmm.
all sorts of things. And so I looked at him as like, he was he saved me because I would have been on the street and
Hmm.
I've had no one. And so you kind of trauma bond a little bit, but at the same time,
Absolutely.
at the same time, nearly 30 years in, and this is where I sometimes like reflect on our relationship. I'm like, far out, we've been so many different people in that time. You're
Hmm.
not just the same person you were at the start. And, and I think sometimes it takes time for you to both find your way. But
Yeah.
and for you to realize that. And it's not giving up on each other, but sometimes I wanted to give up. But part of my trauma was I had a rejection and a abandonment trauma. And so I used to go when we get divorced, like I got married at 19, nearly 20 years old, and I used to say, when we get divorced, I'm taking the dogs and I'm doing this. And I used to talk about breaking up all the
Me
time
too.
because I
Yeah.
was preparing for him to leave.
Yep.
Or I was preparing myself for me to leave. But
Yep.
like here we are 30 years later, and I'm like, by the way, you're never leaving me now.
Yeah. We've worked through that.
I know. And it wasn't until I actually had a psychologist. I went and saw, so I don't know about your, and I'd love to hear how you worked through all of this, but I had a psychologist when we were early married, like maybe 2 or 3 years in, and she said to me, you're trying to push everyone away so that they can't hurt you first.
Yep.
And that was the first time anyone had called me out. And I was like, oh, is she right? And like
Yeah.
sat with it and I was like, fuck, she's right. She's actually
Yeah.
right that I'm trying to push everyone away and make everyone leave me so that I'm right. Like,
Yeah.
because in the background, I'm always thinking they're going to leave me first. So I might as well like push
Get
them
in
away
first.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, as a younger person, I definitely had walls up, and I didn't mind throwing a few punches in order to be able to get people away from me. I was a very fiery,
Same.
yeah, very, very fiery. And I've done so much therapy over the years that I now think about what I've done back then, and I'm now feeling the pain and the guilt and the
Mm,
compassion and the empathy for the person from when I was 18 that I knew that I inflicted pain upon that probably didn't deserve it, and it could
mm,
have been dealt with in a better way. And they're things that I needed to do because for me it was about breaking cycles when I had my own children. So
yep.
having kids was hugely triggering for me. I didn't
Yep.
want to fuck them up. It was my biggest number one priority. Don't fuck the kids, like don't
Don't fuck
ruin the
them
kids.
up.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
no matter how much you try, there's no such thing as a perfect parent, no matter what cards you've been dealt. And I found an amazing therapist who he'll probably get inundated, but his name is Nick Valentine, and he is phenomenal. He's a psychotherapist, and he started getting me to look at different parts of myself using a model called internal family systems theory, and it has been a game changer. So it's got a Buddhist underpinning,
Mm-hmm.
and so for people that are listening, if you think when you're talking to your kids and you hear them say, or as a parent, and you think part of me thinks this, but part of me thinks that, and those parts are actually different parts of you at different ages. So
Yep.
something about that is triggering something in you, which is then enforcing the decision. And
Mm,
so what I had to do was take control of all of those parts that felt like they weren't being heard, they weren't being honored, that
yep.
pain wasn't being acknowledged. And now I can actually close my eyes and visualize how old those parts of me are.
Yep.
And so this little vulnerable part that loves to rear her little head is probably about 6, and she's got mousy brown hair. It's me
Yep.
sitting in my family home in Queensland against a wall, just sobbing into my knees. And now that little girl lifts her head up.
Mm,
Whereas before I started the therapy, it was never. It was, I just couldn't function. And
yep.
then the teenager part of me would come and protect that little girl and start smacking everyone
Fighting.
around. Yeah.
Fighting. Yeah, I
So,
can totally relate to that because I've got similar age. And when I get really defensive, that's my teenager.
yeah.
That's my like, fuck you, fuck everyone, fuck, like, and I do. I've spent a lot of years in that. And I found that when my daughter got to teenagehood, that like made me just regress into a teenager.
Yep.
And I didn't have a therapist to talk me through this, so I've kind of worked this out on my own. But and the hurt little girl inside, she's the one who was abandoned at 7 and
Yep.
made to feel like she wasn't worth anything, and
Yep.
and so that reared its head up the minute my daughter was born. And
Absolutely.
so and you've got, and I think this is the how, I guess, for me and you, we've spent the time to learn this, and we've spent the time to understand ourselves. And my teenager still rears my teenager up. I had a fight with my daughter the other day over something so trivial, and
Mm.
it was literally teenage me fighting with my daughter.
Yeah.
And when I walked away, I was like, "Fuck."
Where did she come from?
And then I had to go and apologize
Yeah.
because I was acting like a
100%.
complete ass.
And I think too, that's probably been my biggest learning out of everything. You know, if I suppose as parents or as adults, we forget how to speak kid, and
Mm.
we think that our problems are, the be all and end all. Got to make sure we can pay the mortgage, got to make sure you get to work, kids have to be able to get to school uniforms,
Yeah.
we want to make sure they've got an iPad, and we want to make sure this. And so then we think that we're under all of this pressure, and we are, not to
Mm.
minimize anybody's pressures, but, or you might be battling a family violence dynamic yourself. But then these our kids come to us with these issues that they might be having at school or with friends or whatever. Completely unintentionally, I noticed myself minimizing some of those things that my kid was bringing to me
Yeah.
because, well, that's just a normal age appropriate problem that you can sort out. But to my daughter and to my son, that's the biggest thing in
Yeah.
their life. That's equivalent to us not being able to pay our mortgage.
Yeah.
And so
100%.
I went and did a degree in, because that's what you do, right? When you're traumatized, you go and do a degree so that you know that you're right. So I did a degree in developmental trauma theory to try and understand my kids and how to parent better. Probably a bit excessive. You don't have to
That
go and
is
do
super
that.
excessive. But I became a police officer, so what the
Yeah.
fuck do I know?
So parents, there are many resources without degrees that you don't have to do, but
Yeah, but if you want to, please do, because we need
yeah,
all of the people
it
out there.
it
But
changed my whole outlook
yeah.
on how to safeguard my kids, how to safeguard myself, how to understand a young person better, and in turn, how to understand me, because I didn't have any of that growing up. I didn't get
Mm,
taught how to play. I didn't get
no.
taught,
You're
then
in a
you've got,
battlefield.
yeah. And so then I wanted to make sure that I didn't create the same battlefield in my house with a
Yeah.
very different foundation, a very different context, because my husband and I have, our commitment when I fell pregnant was, I said, I never want my kids to feel the way that I felt when I was little. And he was
Did that
like,
happen?
"Mm,
Mostly?
mostly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you
So,
know what? My daughter came to me the other day and said to me, Mum, and I became a control freak. I had to control everything.
yes,
Yeah, you know,
I'm
you
still a bit
relate.
like that.
I had to control everything. I had to control every part aspect. I'm like, I was the adjudicator or whatever, the conductor of my family. And
Yeah.
then I've got two people, a husband with cancer I can't control, and a daughter with nearly an adult that doesn't need me to control her anymore or to control her life,
Yeah.
and where the fuck does that leave me? I'm like freaking out over here going, what have I got? I've got nothing left. And
Yeah,
so,
I don't know.
yeah, so it's rearing its ugly head for me right now. But at the same time, she said to me, Mum, like, you need, like, come on, like, you got to let go. And so whenever I let the rein out, like, let go a bit or cut the cord, she's like, no, 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 I need you again. And so we've got
Yeah.
like this, we're
Push pull.
learning, push pull learning. I'm learning about this at the moment for her sake. But she said to me, I actually said to her, I'm sorry, like, and I'm sure you've been there, Jeannie, that you might have said the same thing to your kids. Like, we try our hardest not to fuck our kids up, but we're going to
Yeah.
do some sort of, like, they're going to go away and go, you traumatized me by not letting
Yeah.
me have an iPad, or you
Yeah.
traumatized me by not letting
Do
me have
you know what
sleepovers.
I find in that though that is so amazing, even, is that as a kid, I would never have said to my parents that you were hurting me. I would never have
Same.
said that. So the fact that my kids, and obviously your child, can say, they can call us out because they feel safe enough to say,
Yeah.
this isn't okay, like it's not okay what's happening here, or I
Yeah.
don't appreciate it when you raise your voice to me. I don't. And I love that, So some people look at that from different generations and think that
As
that's a kid with too
defiance.
much entitlement. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, that's a kid with a voice, and a
Yeah.
voice that deserves to be heard. And so
100%.
even when it comes down to, my son's about to turn 18 this weekend, and it's freaking me out, but that's okay. So when they're born, it's like, don't kill them. And then when when they get to 18, it's like, please don't kill yourself or anyone else.
I know.
It's
It's
a
so
very different
scary.
fear. And so I am scared because this was the age I got arrested. And so you get re-traumatized by different things. And I've been
Yes.
very open with my kids about everything. They know everything. They knew I had a drug problem. They knew that we got arrested. They knew, we've laid it all bare, because I think for kids, it can feel like a lot of stuff might happen, but they never get to
Never
see
to
it
me.
actually happen.
Yeah.
And so I said, you're going to know that it actually happened. And I'm going to give you little chunky bits in age appropriate ways.
Yep.
And then with my son now, he knows the whole story.
Yep.
So that's kind of what got me, my life got me into working in this space. And so I started working in child protection. I started my career though in drug and alcohol. So I worked with people with heroin addiction and methamphetamine addiction, go in or go, go hard or go home. Don't start with the small stuff.
No.
Um, and I loved that job, but I did that job for the wrong reasons. So I did it to try and save people and avoid saving myself.
Mm.
Then Black Saturday bushfires happened, and sorry, go back. So I did drug and alcohol, and then I started working with sex offenders and through
In
AXO
prisons?
in post release
Okay.
and pre and so they're post release, but they're about to be released on parole or on a supervision order.
Yep, yep.
And so I did work with them in prisons at ESATAC. So they were on what was then called a ESO, an extensive supervision order. Now it's a detainment supervision order, I believe, a
Yeah, we've got
DSO.
similar terminology over here, but I mean, it just means that they're about to be released and someone has to keep an eye on them
Yes. So
for
these
the
guys
lay
are
terms.
actually still in the prison though.
Yep.
So they're not on segregated prison land, but they're in the front. So in like little cabins,
They're getting
basically.
prepared for
Correct.
release,
So my
basically.
role was to assess their suitability for and how they went in the community. So we take them out into the community and watch their behaviours,
Right.
how far they tried to push the boundary, etc., etc.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
it was a social kind of support and assessment role that worked collaboratively with corrections, and I did that because I wanted to understand how. This is where I might get a little bit funny. I wanted to understand how a person gets to the point where they can do that, and like trying to understand what happened to me basically.
Okay.
And I strangely enough enjoyed that job for a couple of reasons. One was it made me understand that what happened to me wasn't my fault. It helped me to see people rather than behaviors. And it helped me to understand that in order to achieve positive outcomes, you have to be able to work with people that do bad things. And really, really difficult. And I probably fucked myself up a little bit in the process because I was getting no therapy at the time. But it did teach me a lot, and to this day it's still probably one of the jobs that I think forced me to face my own reality. Then from there we had Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria that ripped through the state, and I got moved into child protection. I
Do you
never
mind if
had
I
any.
ask you
Yeah, go.
Do you mind if I ask you about your job? I find it really interesting because for me in the police, I was able to see the person behind the behavior as well. I don't know why I was able to, pull away from that whole they're a sex offender, they hurt kids, they are pieces of shit. They're
Hmm.
just a freaking rock spider, whatever the terminology you want to use. I don't know why it was easy enough for me to do that. I think it was because I quite early on made peace with the fact is it's not my job to judge people. It's my job to put them before the court and let the court judge them. Not that I think the court does a great job, but at the same
Definitely not.
time, I think that's the only way I was able to stay sane in it all, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I think I'm intrigued by anyone who works with sex offenders or child sex offenders especially because it takes a certain level of person to work in that space
Yeah.
because you have to pull apart your own beliefs and get okay with them. And so what I find interesting is it validated your feelings of like I didn't do it to myself, someone else did it to me and it's their responsibility what they did.
Hmm.
And that's seeing the person behind the behaviors, and a lot of people struggle with that. Is there any like learnings that I mean you've pointed out those three, but is there anything else you learned about sex offenders that you probably most people wouldn't know?
Yeah. So that they're people first and foremost. Which, what did I learn the most? I think I definitely learned how my family felt about it.
Oh,
They they told me I can remember one of my cousins actually telling me that he was disgusted by it basically.
that you're working in a
Yeah.
prison with sex offenders
Yeah.
because you were trying to see if they were ready to be released.
Yeah, well, I was just trying to, at that point, none of my family knew anything about me being assaulted. So
Ah.
I could never say, so my mum, I didn't tell anyone about my assault until I was 32. And so I think I had to, I was like, well, they're people and I need to try and understand the person. But I didn't feel like I could say I need to try and understand the person because of this, like when really what I wanted to say was I just wanted to understand them more so that I could determine whether or not the fact that I got raped was my fault or somebody else's. Like, did I have skin in the game to that assault?
Right.
And, but what I learnt about them is they are very calculating.
Mm.
They are highly sensitive. They are very attuned to non-verbal cues.
Yes.
Um, I worked with high-risk sex offenders, so people like Mr. Baldy and Robin Fletcher, who was a pagan, or he claimed to be a witch, and they're very, 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 very manipulative.
Yes,
Um,
and they try and manipulate even the people like you. Like they're
correct,
manipulating everyone in there. Controlling. They're the maestros of their world, and
correct.
they're very good at it. And this
And
is
they
what people
groom
don't realize.
everyone and everything around them. So,
Yeah. How
you
does
know,
that? How do you reconcile that with the fact that they're a person? Because they've obviously honed those skills over time, right? And they
absolutely.
become really good at it. They've been doing this for a long time to the
Yep,
point that they can make anyone believe anything. And if you're not attuned to that yourself, which
yep.
you would have been, I'd imagine, being a victim
Yeah,
of domestic violence, being a victim of abuse, you would have been attuned to the fact
I
that
was attuned to it, but I also had to be really mindful that I didn't
fall for it.
correct. And so there's two kind of layers to this. I'm sitting up now. Hang on a minute. Sorry. You can edit all of this out.
Well, it's up to you if you want to tell everyone what you've been through, but yeah, I can edit it
Yeah.
out as well.
So I have had a spinal surgery, so I'm a bit rickety and hands are a bit shaky and whatever.
Thanks, Jeanie, for just putting yourself into pain for this podcast.
Yeah, that's all right. I think so. For anybody that is going to work in this space, or because I know a lot of people that come from traumatized backgrounds, they move into these environments. I think I think the one thing I had to be really mindful of with working in the sex offender space was that one, that I didn't minimize information based off my own lived experiences, which can happen.
Yes,
The other thing was I needed to be able to, my role was not punitive. My role was not centered around compliance. So I had to ensure that my biases were kept in check.
that's
And
hard to
so
do.
very, very, very hard to do. And for me, I wanted to know more about the person before I met them rather than about their offending. So I would always, obviously, because from a safety point of view, I need to know what I'm working with, but I always got to know the person through a desktop review of their lived experience and their reports. And then I could see the kid and what they had lived through from what they had self disclosed. And then I would look at corroborating evidence that supported that, because self disclosure among sex offenders is very, very prevalent. And a lot of the time there is some embellishments associated to those experiences to minimize or undermine or justify what they've done. And so that helped me separate person from behavior. So I was able to look at, if we think about parts theory, I was able to identify different parts within that person as a means to be able to protect myself and them from any transference or anything like that occurring. I am an empath through and through. So I knew that if I got to know them in terms of their life, then it would make it easier for me to work with them. And it was
Yeah.
difficult. I don't know that I would necessarily do it now at this point in my life in the same way. And because then after that, I went to corrections where it was compliance
Punitive.
driven. I can tell you that I definitely prefer working with post release as opposed to like post release on an order for
Mm.
supervision than working with sex offenders out in the community that are lower risk. And
Mm.
that's just me personally. I think I enjoyed the prison because the prison is controlled
Yes,
and
it's a
control
controlled
gives you
environment.
safety. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Whereas,
massively controlled environment and
yeah,
almost like it's not a real world.
no,
They're not they've got their own like ecosystem within the prison,
yeah,
right? So
they've
it's
got
not a real world,
subcultures, different
and you're
rules.
basically coming in as like someone who's overseeing it, but you're not actually part of it. So you
Hmm.
leave at the end of the day and you switch off and you don't even think about it, whereas when it's in the community it's so different. It's like a lot more
Absolutely.
risk taking, a lot more risks involved, a lot more considerations.
Yeah, I think the hard bit being in corrections as well was, and a lot of people might be surprised to hear this, but a lot of people that work in corrections for many, many years didn't have to have a qualification. And so you had people that were,
Shit.
might have been working at Woolworths packing shelves and then applied for a job at corrections and all of a sudden they're working with sex offenders.
Well, it's no different to prison guards.
Correct. Yep.
You
Yep.
can be anyone from any walk of life as long as you haven't got a criminal record, I believe,
Correct.
and you can go and become a prison guard. What,
And then we wonder why we have,
yeah, we wonder why we have prison guards being manipulated and groomed by people within the prison system to do
correct.
their bidding.
Yes, and I think I don't have any regrets around any jobs that I have held, and I've had different jobs for different reasons. Child protection was never a job, so from the sex offender point of view, that was intentional. I knew why I wanted to do it. I wanted to understand myself more because I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I couldn't even I couldn't even use the word rape for, many, many, many years. I would never identify with being called a victim. So, still some things that sit in the back of my mind there around that sort of stuff, but that's life and
It's the
everybody's
beliefs
different.
behind it, isn't it, right?
Yeah,
Because for a long time you were a victim of domestic violence as well, and
yeah,
so that victim label, for want of a better, and a lot of people don't like that label, right? That victim label makes you weak, or like in your mind you're weak, you don't have choice, you like that.
yeah,
It means that you whatever you put associate that with, but you were a victim and you are a survivor, or whatever label you want to have on that. But
yeah,
it is hard for a lot of people, that victim label, and I
yeah.
think
I
just a
think
quick question.
now I'm just me, you know what I mean? I
Yeah,
don't
I
I
know.
don't want to I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be a survivor. I don't want to be an expert. I don't want to, I'm
But
just
you
me.
are. You're an
Um,
expert in Jeanie Dean.
yeah, and I think that's different. Everybody's different and
Mm,
everybody needs to align with what makes them feel comfortable, safe, seen, heard and secure, and that's
yep.
fine.
Yep.
But, for me personally, you know, labels for me can be a little bit triggering because when you're growing up being called names,
Yeah.
they're labels.
Yep.
And those labels are very hard to separate yourself from and not believe when it's constantly being pounded into your head.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
so when it's a victim, it just takes me straight back there. If
Yeah.
it's a survivor, it means somehow I'm this fucking
Hero.
magical, and I'm not,
Unicorn.
Yeah, I'm just me.
Yeah.
And that for me is important because it's taken me so long to accept that I am enough as I am.
Yes.
I don't have to have a title attached to me. And, for years I've hidden myself through a title. I'm a public servant. I'm this, I'm that.
Mm.
No, I'm just me, and that's a-okay.
Yeah,
Sorry, you
I
had a
can see
question?
that. No, I was just thinking, so you went from like, you chose to go into like working with sex offenders for like purposely, intentionally chose that. You didn't just fall into
Yeah.
that job. You went,
Yeah.
I'm going to go and work with those people. And then because of the Black Saturday
The
fires,
Black Saturday fires, yeah.
you went into child protection. You didn't want
Yeah,
to be
so
there, I take
AXO,
it.
no, so AXO, the Australian Community Support Organisation in Victoria, they were contracted to provide this
Oh, yeah.
sex offender service to the public service. And then a lovely lady said to me, I think you'd be really good in child protection. And I was like, okay. So I just fell into it and I ended up staying there for nearly 10 years. And
Right.
it it was difficult, and that was probably the job that forced me to hold the mirror up to myself around what my lived experience was. I definitely
Well,
wasn't
you would have
an
been
easy
seeing it
public
everywhere.
servant for managers, that's for sure. I didn't
No.
cope well. I didn't well, no, I coped very well, but I did not enjoy the bureaucracy that comes with the public service. If being told when a kid's disclosing to you that they're being beaten by every single family member and then being told, well, we don't have a bed tonight, so we're just going to have to wait till tomorrow, so they're going to have to go home. Yeah,
It
that
doesn't
doesn't
seem like enough,
that
is it?
doesn't
When
fall
when
into
you were
the
that
ethics of
kid,
Jeanie Green. Yeah,
when you were that kid, and it's the same for me, I didn't handle, that the lack of, when a child didn't disclose to police, and then child protection's like, well, police didn't find anything, we're going to close our file. I used to get so angry because
yeah,
that kid was being let down by all of us. I took it so personally.
yeah. And it even goes beyond that. we could probably go down the rabbit warren together here, but
Probably
yeah.
shouldn't start it here. Like,
So
we
it's
will never
like
get finished.
I was disappointed from, sometimes from VicPol or whatever
Mm,
law enforcement agency because the quality of interview is so person dependent. Then I was
yes,
disappointed around child protection because the quality of their service is so person dependent based on training,
correct.
investment, experience. Then you get into the family court who relies on child protection, who's got a shit assessment. Then
Okay, yeah.
you know what I mean? It's just this system-based trauma that happens over and over and over again. And everyone who's worked in the space knows it. We see it. The Attorney General's doing everything they can to try and do what they can with the budgets that they have. And I understand all of that from a system-based point of view.
Mm.
But when you work in that space and you've had that lived experience, it feels very personal. And
Oh, totally.
I
You put
couldn't,
yourself in the
I,
shoes of those children.
yeah. And so when you deny that child access to safety, you're denying me access to safety. And
Gosh, that would
so
have been
I
confronting.
decided, I was like, I think I'm out, I'm done. And so I then ran a sexual assault service for a year, and then went into emergency services.
You're hilarious because you've just like literally gone, right, I'm going to deal with every part of my trauma.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at the
And
time,
I'm joking because it's like you literally chose every career. You could have chosen a nice career as a hotel receptionist, but no,
I know,
you chose every career
I
that was going to
know.
put you in the face of it.
Yeah. And I think part of it was I didn't know how else to deal with it. And when, I don't know about you, but when I was younger, going to therapy and,
No, it
they
wasn't
just weren't
normal.
options, and if you did, there was something wrong with you. And it was something
Mm.
you never told anybody about and whatever. And so, that just wasn't an option. And so my work allowed me to, one, avoid my own pain because I was
Because you're
investing in
helping
other
other people.
people's pain,
Yep.
but telling myself that this is fixing me at the same time.
Mm.
I think that after the Australian maltreatment study was done, I think that the public service and the legal fraternity more broadly really needs to look at the prevalence of maltreatment in the public service that's
Ugh.
impacting decision making.
Oh my gosh, yes. And
Yeah.
also you brought it up before, right? How easily do people, you brought it up when you were saying I had to like look at myself and not allow myself to use like my experience to like
To
for want
assess
of it.
another person.
Yeah, so if I, and you said that, and you've said it so beautifully, more beautifully than I can, every person in these services, the police, the child protection, the family court, they're all making personal judgments based on their own experiences, and then they have their own trauma. Most of us come into these, and it's only the really highly brave people like you who go
Mm.
and say, right, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to look at what this means.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting a message.
That's okay.
Um, it's my daughter.
That's okay.
Mm. So yes, I agree with you, and I think that was why I then stepped away, and not because of the maltreatment study that happened after that, but
Yeah.
I could see that happening, and I
Yeah.
knew that I was a feature of that,
Yes.
and that my work was hurting me, and
Right.
so I
Wow.
decided at the worst time, as we jumped straight into COVID, to
Oh,
go out on
same
my own.
happened to me. Same thing happened. Oh,
And
Jeanie.
I'm like, what am I
Uh,
doing?
I know.
And
And by the way, lockdown, 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 and
yeah,
like,
and in
how am I meant to
Victoria,
make money?
you know, so you
Yep.
couldn't even leave your front door at home. So, like in Victoria, so but I was determined to, the thing I suppose the point that got me to where I am now was my husband telling me that I wasn't the same person that I used to be. So the job had changed me dramatically. I had become the job. Everything was about the job. I was taking phone calls 24/7. I was helping people in the community for nothing. I was, and I still do that.
I mean,
I
you've had multiple phone calls whilst we've been talking.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So, and all of this stuff, I do a lot of it pro bono. So
Mm.
I don't take money off people who need that money for their kids. And I'll just provide some advocacy support for some system-based stuff, whether it be family court or helping people navigate the criminal system or whatever it is. And then I started Safeguarding Solutions Australia as a means to get out of the bureaucracy and actually be allowed to have honest conversations with people about children, child safety, and the safety of vulnerable people more broadly, so mental health, aged
Yeah.
care, disability. But my focus was always the voice of children, and making sure that I could teach myself again how to speak kid.
Yeah.
And now it's been, so 2018, I started the business, and I've been working um, in that business pretty solidly, well, since then. But the last 2 years have been really challenging after my injury to my neck. So I think, why did I start it? Was I wanted no more red tape. I wanted to operate under the conditions that were being set by the commissioner, not by the department, because they are clashing quite a bit.
Yes. Yes.
And I wanted to educate the places where kids frequent the most
Mm.
about what child safety is and how do you create child safe environments. And a lot of these organisations that we've worked with along the way, they haven't even realised that they're a child focused organisation or a child serving organisation. You know, if we think about
Who they
people,
who
kids
they
doing
service.
apprenticeships through, local mechanics. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, do you realise that you have to adhere to the principles of child safety because you employ minors? And they're like, no, because we're not providing services to kids. And I'm like, you're providing an apprenticeship, which is a service. So
Mm-hmm.
you cannot have the nudie calendar on your bathroom wall and hanging up women's or men's underwear as a token of what you've been able to achieve over your weekend. Like, none of that stuff can happen. And this is the stuff that parents don't get to see, right? They see the face of a business that their child is walking into, and they assume, as any parent would, that it is safe
Mm.
because we have work cover and we have WorkSafe and we have all of these other entities and the Commissioner for Children and Young People that say these businesses have to be safe. And so a lot of parents take that on face value. And a lot of these organisations are not safe for kids. A lot of these organisations have no understanding that they have to be ensuring that they're providing safe spaces for kids, or what that even looks like. And if I use the emergency services as an example, so if we think about
Right.
fire services in Victoria, they spend more time with kids providing services than they actually put out fire each year.
Yeah.
So they didn't know that. And so it's like, okay, so what's your child safe strategy? What does this look like? What does this look like? What does this look like? And a lot of the firefighters, so the culture within the organisation was, well, our job is to put out fires. So why
But
do
you're
we
doing
need to
education. You're around
correct?
children. You've got like those little cadets and rangers and all of those things.
Absolutely. Yep. And if you think about, a lot of fire services have junior brigades.
Yeah, that's
Then
what I
you
meant.
have Army Reserves. Yes,
Yeah.
Army Reserves have junior cadets.
Yeah.
Or so all of these systems that are assumed by parents to be safe. I'm not saying that none of them are, but I'm
But they
saying that
haven't done the
everything
due
could always be
diligence.
better.
Yeah.
And from the organisations that I've walked through across the country and internationally, they're, we have a long way to go. And I think the biggest gap that exists right now is that parents are unaware of what they need to ask, what they can ask, what should be in place. How do they check in with their kids about whether or not what it should be happening is happening, and
Mm.
what support system is there if it's not? And
Yeah.
a lot of these organizations are like, well, that's going to cost us money and we don't have the money to do it. And it's like, okay, so you've got a budget for your Christmas party,
Yeah.
but you don't have a budget for protecting your staff
Or your
and
children, the children within your organization, which
organization.
are your staff. Yeah. And I mean,
Correct.
look, I think this is the silliest, like this is crazy to me because I think if you have a child in your employment or in your organization, you have to have a child safety policy of some description. Because in my experience working, investigating abuse, I saw so many kids being preyed upon, targeted, maltreated because, it's just what we do to the apprentice. It's just what we do to the cadet or the ranger
Yeah.
or the whatever. I mean, I was involved in investigating so many cases within the armed forces in Australia because they had an inquiry into all of the abuse of cadets and rangers and like their junior children, before
Yeah.
they became serving members by serving members of the thing. And that was considered as an initiation or a
Hazing.
hazing. And
Yeah.
these people completely and utterly, like there was one case that I can remember was involved with the band, and they were
Mhm.
hazing their junior players. And there was some horrendous things that happened to those poor kids when they were kids, and for some reason it was seen as normal. Sure, behind when children, it just needs to change. We need to change our thought process. And just because they might be 15, 16, 17 doesn't mean that they're adults. It means that they're still children. You have a responsibility. And if you're in power and authority over those kids, you could be considered an abuse of your power.
Correct. Yep. So so I agree with you, and I think that a lot of boards and employers don't understand what their legal duties are associated to child safety. We give a lot of board presentations to a lot of large-scale organisations that I won't mention for obvious
No, that's
reasons,
that's fair.
but these are organisations that are out in the community providing services to community members that are highly reputable across Australia who don't know what they don't know.
Yeah,
And
well, that's the problem.
when we hide stuff, and this is what happens in large scale organizations, things get filtered before they get to the board, right?
Right.
And so what we have said is the filtering has to stop because the board is the people that are going to go to prison and lose their houses if things don't go right. And so
Exactly.
they need to be able to understand the risk that they're carrying. And what the flip side to that is, so you've got the head of entity not knowing, and then you've got the parent that also doesn't know, and then you've got all the secrecy and the bullshit in the middle.
Yeah,
And
people
so,
covering their own asses, making sure that they
correct,
don't get caught out because they don't want to go be involved in an investigation. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to,
absolutely.
yeah,
And a
and
lot of you think
crazy.
about work, even if I go back to when I first started speaking during the podcast and I said work became everything to me. It helped
Mm,
me understand myself, it helped me understand my pain. So within that, it means that you're building connections and subcultures then get created within large scale businesses, whether it be, and you can probably say from policing
same,
culture, it is
same.
nuts. It can be very, very healthy, but it can be very, very dangerous.
And in a
And
lot of these big organizations, such as policing, such as military, such as fire, such as, any kind of
yeah,
large scale organization where there's this culture of authority and it filters
power.
down,
Yeah.
power, and it filters down like the police culture. And I'm not saying there aren't amazing police officers, detectives, and people doing
Oh, phenomenal.
everything
And
they
I have
possibly
many
can,
friends that are amazing.
but there is this culture of the first day I spent in, out of the academy. I was taught all of this stuff in the academy. And then the first day I got out of the academy, a senior constable who'd been in the job for 20 years said, forget everything you've been told. It's nothing like that. And we don't dog on our mates. So basically, we don't do what they tell us to do. And you don't go and dob on people when they do the wrong thing. That was the
Correct.
first thing I was told the first day. It
Yeah.
completely blew me. Like I was this night. I hadn't really got my voice yet. Like
Yeah.
policing, like you, when you said, "Oh, your husband said to you, this has changed you." It was the same for me and my family. They were like, "You are not the same person anymore." And
Yeah.
you're not the person we remember. And so
Yeah.
that's a real wake up call when your family's calling you out and saying you have changed beyond anything that we remember.
Oh, I just didn't trust anything. Well, I didn't trust anything before, and I trusted everything even less once I got into public service. So, what safety I had found in other areas of my life was eroded by the experience within the public service. And I think the experience of my roles within the public service between child protection and corrections, I don't regret for a second.
No, me neither.
And I loved my job, and I loved most of the people that I worked with. I'm not going to say
Yeah,
all of them,
same.
but most of them. I think that we have the potential to provide a really amazing service in Australia, but we need to get old people out of old seats and dust them off and get fresh eyes in there because we live in a very different society. We live in a very different culture. We live in a digital age that people holding positions do not understand. And I think that for as long as we have this, and you can almost watch it happening, so there's a real us and them that exists within the public service between frontline operations and people that sit in what gets referred to as the ivory tower.
Yes.
And I think that gap needs to be bridged a little bit more to create better outcomes for kids. I think if that happens, that would make a big difference. I too can attest to the fact that the first day I started in child protection, I was finished my beginning practice training, which was 3 months. I walked into the office. My team leader had placed about 13 files on a swivel chair, walked over to me and she said, "These are the files, read them all and remember that babies die."
Jeanie,
That was my initiation into child protection.
get out.
Yeah. So basically everything that we had been taught in beginning practice training of you'll be supported, you'll have this, you'll do this, and it'll be great, and it's all going to sound like this amazing place like a unicorn comes out of. It is absolutely not like that. I would love to be able to tell people, yes, go and do this job. It's amazing, and it is amazing, but please make sure you look after yourself first. Please make sure you know yourself really well before you get into it
Yeah,
and be able to be assertive enough to push back, because
yeah.
otherwise the public service is very good at getting blood out of stones. So
Yes, that's
look
exactly
after
what
yourself.
happened with me. I mean, I was getting like the same thing, like I was pushing back. And in the early years, I just went with it. And this is where poor, you're just out of university, you're 24 years old, and you think, I want to go and save the world and get into child protection. And you're basically just a lapdog that is told what to do and you do it. Because if you push back, you're
The
bullied,
agitator.
you're the problem. They're going to find ways to get rid of you, or they're going to find ways to make your life difficult. And this is the culture that is within these cultures, right? Like this is
Mm.
the culture within policing.
And
This is
these
the
are the
culture
systems we're entrusting with our children.
1000%. And then the family court and all of these things have this culture within them because it's easier to go with the flow and not and turn a blind eye than it is to push back and say, no, this is not enough. This is not good enough. And I mean, look, we sound like we're jilted ex-lovers, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, I think you and I both have been out long enough to know that this is the culture we're trying to change with what we're doing now.
exactly. Yeah. And I think that I by no means want to send a message to anybody listening to this podcast not to engage your emergency services.
No, 100%.
We do have amazing opportunities to access services. We have a very congested service system and the people in those services, for the most part, are there for the right reasons to deliver the best service possible to people that are being harmed. But sometimes the system impacts the capacity for the operation to do what it needs to do. And so,
And the
um,
legislation too.
yeah, so
There's a
just,
little,
I think,
yeah.
go in with education and, don't be afraid to say, no, I'm not doing this, and it just because somebody's a police officer or works for child protection or works in youth justice or has a little badge that says I have a little bit of control over you doesn't mean that you can't advocate for your rights and your own safety.
Okay, well, that's a good question because I think a lot of people listening to this will probably think, "Oh no, there's no." And I've had people say, I did a podcast interview a week ago where I was criticizing the current justice system and that there's no justice in the justice system and all of this stuff. And I was criticizing it from the perspective that we don't trust children and we don't believe children, and
Yeah,
it's so hard for children's evidence to ever actually get to court to begin with. But then when it gets to court, we still think that children are unreliable witnesses and that they lie and all of these things. Anyway, we won't go there. But what I want to say next is this. If you are a parent, or my question is if you are a parent and you're concerned about your child in an organization, doesn't matter what one, it could be a sports-based organization, could be a community-based organization, or any kind of organization, what kind of things should they expect from that organization?
so they should expect at a minimum that, well, depending on the state and or the jurisdiction that you're in, at a minimum across all states and jurisdictions, there should be a commitment statement to what your position on child safety is.
Mm-hmm.
There should be an appropriate vetting and screening process. And as parents, we need to be asking,
Yep.
what is your child safe recruitment process? Does this include a working with children's check or a
Blue
blue
card.
card or whatever it is that you're from? There should also be, what is the supervision ratio? So if you're providing a service, what's the supervision ratio? What are the safe systems of work that have been put in place to protect children that you provide services to? When I drop my daughter, so for example, for my daughter who did cheerleading, I'm sure this person who I'm friends with now, who owns it, but I'm sure when she
At the
first met
time,
me,
she was
she
like,
thought,
"What are you talking about?"
who are you? And I said, do you have a child safety policy? What's the supervision process for comp? What does this look like? What do you do in terms of your bullying strategy to ensure kids aren't excluded? How do kids make complaints to your guys? And if it's about you being the owner, who do they go to? Who's your child safety marshal? And she just looked at me as if like, we're just a dance school.
Yeah,
You
but
know?
you made that dance school safer by asking those
Yeah.
questions and bringing
And
them
so
to their
when you go to
attention.
these things, I went to this first cheer competition. There are kids everywhere,
I know, so
and I
dangerous.
do not see one person that is identifiable as a child safety marshal.
Officer.
Yeah. So that way then you've got adults that are walking amongst everybody's kids, kids getting changed everywhere, etc. What's the system here to be able to ensure safety and protection of kids? And as parents, we need to educate ourselves. It's not up to somebody to tell you that you shouldn't stick needles in your arms, right? That's something that you need to know, right? That's something
Yeah.
you have to try and learn and educate yourself on.
Yes.
When you have children, you have a
It's the same.
responsibility to educate yourself on how to keep them safe.
Yes.
And so what I would suggest to every parent is to get on the
Young people.
Young People's websites across whatever state you're in. There's one
Yep.
in every state.
Yep.
May not be mandatory in all states, but there is one. Or your Minister for Children if you don't have a commissioner, and find out what are the minimum standards set by your government that organisations have to comply with or it is recommended,
Hmm.
and you make an informed decision. If you're living in a state where it's not mandatory, then you need to seriously consider whether or not for me, if it wasn't mandatory and the organisations weren't investing in it at that time, and in Victoria, I was looking for this for years before it became a legislation, because
Mm.
as a kid, I knew,
Yep.
my situation was with a basketball dynamic. So,
Mm.
you know, I was very attuned to who's who in the zoo,
Yep.
and if they don't have it and it's not mandatory, don't leave them unsupervised, no matter
Yep.
how old they are. If they're
Yep.
15, 17,
Doesn't matter.
people think, and please, 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 as a final message, don't think that because your child is older that they are safer. In a safeguarding context from a community organisation or broader, the older the child, the greater the risk because there's less supervision.
Yes.
Whereas in child protection, the younger the child, the greater the risk because they've got no self-protection capabilities from a parent, not from an organisation. So please make sure that you understand that kids getting older offers a protective factor in one sense, but it creates a whole lot of risk in another. So don't don't be naive to think that at 15 it's okay for them to be unsupervised in an environment that you haven't actually assessed to be safe yourself. That's your job.
100%. And I saw, and this is so common. And the problem is that culturally and, ideas around this is that, once they get over a certain age, children get over a certain age, as a culture, we believe that it's the child's fault that they've been sexually abused.
Mm.
There was a survey or some sort of like research done by I can't think who it was, the Australian Child Abuse Centre or whatever they are,
Oh, yes, excellence. Yep.
and they came up they surveyed all of these people, and I think it was like 30% or 40% of the people who answered said when a child is a teenager, it's up their responsibility to stop child sexual abuse. Now I know that children who are at risk, they're at risk because how are they meant to push back against an adult? They're groomed by these people. We've talked about all of
we
this
teach
stuff.
we teach kids to comply
Yeah, I know
from
exactly.
the time we from the to give birth.
Yeah.
We are teaching kids to comply with an adult's direction. You
Uh-huh.
will feed when I feed you. Like, it starts from infancy and then we just continue it along the journey. And even
Exactly.
if I think about high schools, don't even get me started, but
I know.
it's it's as simple as this. Just meet kids where they are.
Yes.
Kids aren't assholes for no reason. Kids don't behave badly for no reason. Kids don't tell you you're a fucking asshole for no reason. So if they are saying all of these things, you should be curious enough and ask yourself, how, what influence am I having on this behavior, and how do I support that shift?
Mm,
And a lot of the time we project the responsibility to fix the problem to the kid. So you're the
yes.
adult sitting here saying, I don't know what to do. This kid's driving me nuts.
Mm,
You need, 15-year-old, you need to fix what I can't fix and understand.
yeah.
But
Doesn't work
I'm
like that.
50. It's like that's just projecting responsibility to a child and setting them up to fail. And so
Mm,
I think we all, as parents, educators, whatever, anyone who's working with kids, if you want to really be successful at working with young people, you have to hold the mirror up to yourself and find yourself as a kid and remember what it felt like.
yeah.
Once you can remember that, then you'll be able to understand where they're at and meet them where they are. But if you've got a kid that just constantly says to you, you just don't understand, listen to them, because
Mm,
they, well, regardless of what you think, they are telling you you don't understand. And when they're getting frustrated like that and outside their window of tolerance, you're losing them, which means that then you end up with a kid like me who can't go home and say, I was raped this morning.
mm. And that's the last thing. I mean, any parent who loves their kid doesn't want their kid to feel like they couldn't come to them if they needed them or
Absolutely.
needed support. And my daughter has had friends who have been sexually abused or raped. And, that when they've gone and told a parent, they've been given crickets, they've been slapped, they've been, because when a child, does disclose abuse and tries to disclose abuse, it's not, they've done their job. They've told the safe person that they think is the safe person. And it's our job to manage ourselves and assist them. I
Mhm.
just, there's not enough thought and processing done before we have kids. I really believe this, that we
I
don't,
agree. I
and
think
it
it's
doesn't come up
interesting that,
until
you know, you have to be able to be screened to be able to have a dog, that
for
anyone can
some
have a kid.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And and
Yeah.
I'm not saying that about anyone that's, the benefit I think for me is that I don't live in a glass house and I don't throw stones. And I have been the drug addict, I have been the crook, I have been the person that called her dad's employment and told them he was dealing marijuana when he wasn't, because I was an angry teenager, that because he had hurt me, he'd abandoned me, he'd beaten my mum, I've been all parts of that,
Mm,
and which is why I love working with vulnerable people, because I can relate to it. And when people are lashing out, they're not lashing out for no reason. And a really big part of, I think, my future state is, for anybody, you know, as Kristi said before, I have had neck injury and I'm probably going to have to pivot in terms of the work that I have done. And
mm,
a really kind of interesting element of that is I want to teach parents how to speak kids so that they can connect with their kids better. And, it's more than one conversation at a time. And you have to be prepared to hold the mirror up and say, I think I might have fucked up here,
yeah.
and actually apologize to your kids and stop thinking that they're just they're just younger versions of you, and think about what you would have wanted when you were little and
Mm,
and a young adult. And I think, but to kind of bring it back to safeguarding in the context of, that's safeguarding kids in your own home. Safeguarding isn't just about the external. We
yes.
have to safeguard our own,
Environment.
nucleus kind of culture, of what kind of culture do we want to set in our family for our kids, so that when they do go into these organizations and the organization does have a complaints policy, they feel safe enough to use it because they have a soft place to land when they get home.
Yeah.
I didn't have that soft place to land, so I never used the systems available to protect me.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, safeguarding is an external big beast that is politically evolving all the time. But I think if we start safeguarding at home and we empower our kids to challenge us as parents about our thinking,
Yep.
then we will create stronger kids who will create deterrence, because they will be more assertive
Yes.
and less likely to be an easy target for somebody that's looking for an opportunity to sexually assault a child. But if we stop,
100%.
if we keep closing these conversations down because we're uncomfortable with them, and that's often why they're not had, we're
Mm,
uncomfortable with them, or we have a trauma history we haven't addressed, all we're doing is creating a cycle of intergenerational abuse. So
yeah.
I firmly believe it has to start in here with us as people, as individuals, to be able to create safer environments for kids.
Boom, mic drop. She just dropped all of the gold. I 100% agree with you. I couldn't agree more. And it's in my own experience. Look, I'm not saying I have all of the answers and I haven't parented all of the, like my trauma and my experiences come up all the time, even now. I'm still struggling
Hmm.
with that. But it's about owning your part in it, owning your
Hmm.
feelings, emotions, and what you're doing, and just, yeah, and doing all of these things. But also, I think there's a lot to be said is that you can speak up if you're not sure. You can ask those questions of their dance school, of their sporting club, of their their school, of
Yeah.
whoever, just. And I guess the last thing I would say on all of that is just come from a place of curiosity so that you don't come
Yes.
across as aggressive or like that complaining, whinging parent, because we don't get results when that happens. If we come across as, hey, I'm just wondering, do you guys have any of these policies in place? And
Yeah.
then, if they don't, just say, oh, okay, well, are you aware that you're meant to have them? Or if it's a legislation, or if it's not legislated, what, like in Western Australia, it's a recommendation. Are
Yeah.
you working towards putting some of these in place? And, it's
And
planting those
how can I
seeds.
help?
Yeah,
How can I
true.
help? How can I, if you haven't got it yet, I'm happy to do a bit of digging. If your kid's part of that organization, and a lot of these organizations are run by volunteers, a lot of these volunteers have known each other and their dads went and played footy together and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Be part of the solution. And it's very similar to yes, right? So if we think about the Occupational Health and Safety Act in whatever jurisdiction you live in, there is a key line in that act that says you must hold responsibility for your own safety. So child protection and child
It's the
safety is
same.
no different.
Yeah,
You have to
100%.
take a responsibility for your children's safety and ensuring that your children are safe when you are engaging them in organizations. It's not just up to the organization, it's up to everybody. And I think everybody's waiting for somebody else to do something
Yeah.
and then nothing gets done. So, as parents, if you have children, no matter what their ages are, you need to be part of the solution and not wait for people to do things because it'll never happen and kids will never be able to reach that pinnacle point where no matter where they go, they know they're going to be seen, heard, believed, and
Mm,
safe. So
mm,
I think we need to, as a community, it's a community issue
yeah.
and parents are part of that community.
And it's a community response, like it requires parents to not only ask the questions, but, maybe put their hand up to go, hey,
Yeah.
here's the website that you need. Or, hey,
Yeah.
here's a sample of what this club
Or,
has.
hey, I found one from the club down the road.
Yeah.
Do we want to just kind of pivot, like just reshuffle that so it fits our context,
Yeah. Or do
Like,
we want to
I
get
think,
an expert in, like someone like you or me, and come and talk about child safety so we're
yeah.
all on the same page together?
Yeah, I'm happy to give you a policy, but the policy's useless unless you're living it.
Yes,
So it requires a conversation. And that's
it
the bit that
does.
I think that's the other thing for parents is that we've spoken so far about, as parents, what do we want to be looking for when we're looking for child safe agencies or organisations or services? And we've spoken a lot about policies, systems, processes. The biggest thing is around just go there for a day or stay there, stay at the club for the whole day and watch how people interact with each other. That
Mm,
will tell you what kind of culture exists and how safe your kid's going to be.
mhm,
So
mhm.
when I hear, for example, I'll give an example for footy because it's probably the most relevant across all states in Australia. But if we think about football and we think about under 16, sometimes you'll have under 16 players transitioning and playing in senior football teams. So under 19s, if they're good enough, they'll be playing, in the ones or the reserve side.
Yep.
So you've got a child with
Yep.
a group of men or group of women or a mixed team, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden they're talking about how many beers they had on the weekend at a party or whatever, or who they hooked up with, to how much a gram of ice is and who got on the puff last night and blah, blah,
Yep.
blah, blah, blah.
Depending where you grow up and where you are. I mean, it's
Correct.
probably very culturally everywhere, like even in my
Oh,
club
listen, there's
community.
drugs in every club, every single club. And, and I think that as when we're kind of looking at that, I think there's a really big gap in safeguarding when it comes to the transition from junior to senior environments
Yeah.
when they sit under the same umbrella. And no different to the junior brigades and the normal brigades. We
Yeah.
we forget that they're kids and a whole lot of inappropriate stuff happens.
Yeah.
And parents that are part of those clubs minimize it and they're like, oh, it's fine. It happened when I was younger too. It's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Is that
Can you
mean that
guys,
it's okay?
yeah, like, are you happy with your son sitting in there while they're racking up lines of coke in the change rooms? Are you okay with that? Because that's what happened when you were younger. I don't
Mm,
think so. But that's the reality. So these are the conversations when I'm going to clubs. I've grown up around sporting clubs my whole
yeah.
life. So I
Not
can
so
talk
much
to,
coke being done in netball clubs or pony club, but there is like my daughter did pony club. I was on the committee and I was like I never left her alone. Like I
yeah,
went with her everywhere she went. When she became a netballer, I became the coach and I was like, that coach that safeguarded all of those kids in my team, and I was
yeah,
watching other teams and I was making, if I was, training late or whatever, I would stay until every child had a safe place to go, like, or a safe
yeah.
home, or like I'd be like, is your parent coming? Like, where are they? And so I was that safe adult, but it just takes
But
one person to
again,
not be.
the risk in that is that it's person dependent again.
Exactly.
So it's about, so for my local club, it's all good because I'll do whatever is required to create safety,
Same.
right? And but if I disappear, who's going to take that role?
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
it's
that's
not
why we need
embedded.
these.
It's
That's
not
why we need these
embedded.
policies and these cultures. I mean, we had a case in WA where, and it's actually I know some of the people personally where these reserves, they were part of like a reserve club for a feeder club into the AFL, and they had an 18th birthday party. There were 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds there, and older kids, and they were doing drugs and alcohol. Everyone was drinking. They got in a car, they drove, and he crashed at high speeds, killed one of the top, reservists. And, this young fella was only 17 at the time. He's now in jail for the next 9 to 10 years because he killed one of his best mates.
Culpable driving. Yep.
And so this is a thing, like all those, and I mean, I'd imagine some of those adults feel so much guilt and so much shame because they were not being safe adults, they were not being responsible. Yes, it's those young people's lives, but we're talking about kids here. We're talking about
Well,
an 18-year-old is not like, they might be legally an adult, but
yeah,
mentally they're
they're
not
not
an
enough.
adult. But
Yep.
they are culpable and they are the people who are responsible. But
And
as adults, we're responsible as well.
there's intergenerational cultures that exist within sporting institutions or local, child serving agencies, whether it be the Scouts or whatever else.
Yep. Yep.
Those the intergenerational culture sits within those agencies and so within those organizations, sorry. And I think just that story there around, a young boy getting in a car, driving a car, that example's been set for him by virtue of the fact that adult men are getting in their cars after being on the piss all day and
Mm,
going the back streets to go home. So it's like you then say, oh, they're so silly, how ridiculous. It's like, hang on, mate, you've got skin in the game here because you've taught these kids that it's okay to drink and drive because you drink and drive.
mm.
So I think it's around the standard you work past is the standard that you accept.
Yes.
And when we go into these sporting clubs and have these conversations, you can't be fluffy about it.
No,
It's very
it's going to ruffle
firm, very
feathers.
direct. Yep. And I love it when people try to, pop up a little challenge of, oh, it's just getting into this wokeness, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, so if I know that your son is using a substance that I think is causing harm to him, if it's really just woke stuff, do you just not want me to tell you? You just rather wait for the full blown addiction to hit your way, or what's your preference? Well,
Yeah.
no, of course I'd want to know about it. I said, okay, so if there's no system in place that says that we have to tell you about it, you're not going to know about it. So do you want to be
Mm,
part of the problem or part of the solution? And it's like, oh, yeah, I think a policy is a good idea. Okay, great, no worries.
I love that.
But I think it's about bringing people on the journey. I don't think for you can't beat people into submission with this stuff.
No.
It's got to be done with people, not to people. Sometimes you've got to bring out a bit of stick, and organizations have to be prepared to get rid of people
Yeah.
because good people do bad things. And if you're not prepared to do that, you're basically waiting for an assault to occur and a big fat common law claim to come your way. So if it's not going to be enough to make changes because it's inherently what's in the best interest of children,
Mm,
think about what it means for the reputation of your business. Think about what it means for your reputation personally as a person that chose to ignore these risks despite them
mm.
being brought to your attention.
Yeah.
And think about the fact that your club's going to close because no one's going to be there. And if you've got a mandatory system like in Victoria, then you can actually be shut down because WorkSafe will come in and close your doors for you.
Yeah. And
So
not to mention people can lose. I mean, I know that when I was on committees, I think there's some legislation around the committee being the responsible parties and can be considered
yes,
responsible.
so they are actually in Victoria under ASIC and the registration, the
Yeah.
committee members are legally liable and hold a duty. And a lot of these small sporting agencies don't realise that. And so if you don't have the right insurance, it'll be your house that pays the lawsuit.
Yeah.
And when you say that, generally you get compliance.
Yeah,
So
well, it has to be, and we need to stand up against this because it's gone on for too long, and our kids need us to, and it's our job. So, I guess,
yeah,
Jeanie, like we could talk about this forever. I mean,
yeah,
I could pick apart so many parts of your story, but I bet you your back's hurting now.
my
Um,
next, so yeah.
Okay,
But,
so we're going to like finish there, and I reckon maybe next year or whenever I start back up again, we could have another conversation. So
mm.
if they want to learn more about safeguarding and what you do or about you, where can they find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn if you just look up Jeanie Dean.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
I'll
you
put
can
it
look
in the
up
show notes.
Yep. Otherwise, you can look up Safeguarding Solutions Australia, and we are unique in terms of our service offering. We are not a traditional safeguarding agency. We work across the whole plethora of vulnerability, including adults. And our focus primarily is ensuring safe systems of work, and we provide expert witness reports to ensure that organisations that aren't compliant are brought to justice through whatever regulatory body. But we also work in a preventative and proactive space. So if you are an organisation that might have found yourself in a little bit of a pickle and not quite sure how to get out of that pickle with understanding safety, dignity, and respect of every party involved,
Hmm.
we're generally the organisation that would get that phone call to say, can you give us a hand?
Yeah,
There's other agencies that work and do a lot of training and all of that sort of stuff. Because of my current circumstances, I'm going to have to shift what
yeah.
we've done.
There's
We
got to
did
be a pivot.
investigations for a long time, but yeah, a few changes. But yes, you can reach out to us anytime. And if we can do it, we will. And if we can't, we will find you the best person who can. And
Yeah,
we
great.
refer to people like Kristi
Mm,
and other organisations for things that aren't the right fit. If it's not the right fit for us, we will not blow smoke up your backside and tell you we can deliver everything. We'll make
yeah.
sure that you're with the right person.
Yeah, amazing. And like a lot of people didn't realize that this was even a thing, right? Safeguarding has
Yeah,
become a new, I guess, industry in its own right because we didn't have any of this. And the only reason safeguarding is even here is because people have done the wrong thing. So,
correct.
if you've got an issue with safeguarding, it's because you've got an issue with the fact that people have done the wrong thing.
Yeah. And if you've got an issue with if you've got an issue with safeguarding, you've probably got major issues in your occupational health and safety program too, because they're
Probably.
dependent on each other.
Probably. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Jeanie. I'm going to let you
Thank
go so
you.
you can go and rest that poor back that you've just had surgery on. And but thank you very much for sharing your experience and all of your knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Education empowers children, strengthens parents, and most importantly, prevents abuse. That's why I do this work, and that's why you're here. So truly, thank you. If you'd like more support or resources, follow me on social media under Kristi McVee or Cape-AU, where you'll find all the links in the show notes. You can also grab a copy of my book, Operation KidSafe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention at www.cape-au.com, where you'll find further resources and self-paced courses to help you in this journey of protecting your kids. If you found this episode valuable, please take a moment to leave a review or share it with someone important. Your support helps more parents and caregivers discover this important information and take action to keep kids safe. Check the show notes for extra links and support, and most importantly, thank you for showing up and taking action to protect your kids. See you next time.